When I was 11, I went to a funeral home with my cousins. One of my cousin's grandmother passed away, and I remember just spending time with my cousins. Hmong funerals usually last for about 3 or 4 days, and I went every one of those days. One day, at the funeral home, late at night, my younger cousins, who were 7 or 8 years old at the time, wanted to play hide and seek. They were bored and complained that there was nothing to do. The cousins around my age got annoyed and agreed to play. Us being kids, we all went outside and decided on who was the seeker. We played rock, paper, scissors, and one of my cousins, Sheng, lost and became the seeker. I don't remember how many kids were playing, but it was around 10 of us. Some of you guys might wonder where the elders were. Most of them were inside and only a couple were outside to smoke and talk, but they were standing by the front entrance. Anyways, Sheng started a countdown and we all ran to go hide. There weren't many places to hide besides the parking lot and the bushes. The younger cousins and I hid in the tall bushes on the right side of the funeral. To give a little bit more detail, it's a big funeral home. The funeral was surrounded by bushes, and behind the parking lot was a forest. We all agreed not to hide in the forest since it was a dangerous idea. As we were hiding inside of the bushes, we would giggle every time a seeker would walk by. Eventually, after 10 minutes, Sheng and the other seekers gave up and told us to come out. We all popped out of the bushes laughing and making fun of them for not finding us since we were so close to the funeral home. Sheng and one of my other cousins looked at us with a scared expression. I asked them, "Hey, what's the face for?" And the two of them stared at each other in silence for a good minute. That's when one of them asked, "Did you ever move around?" "No, I've been hiding with the younger kids the whole time in the bushes." The younger kids agreed with me, which made them even more scared and suggested that we go back inside to the funeral home. They never talked about it, and I never asked what spooked them. But 2 or 3 years ago, I suddenly remembered the incident and asked them. This was when Sheng spoke up. "You know how I found basically everyone, right?" she asked. "Well, we were looking for you in the parking lot. That's why we never came near the funeral home." "What does that got to do with it?" I asked. "Because we heard your laughter in the parking lot. That's why we spent 10 minutes there." "Are you sure? Are you sure it just wasn't one of the other kids?" I asked. "No, it wasn't. We all heard it, and even the little cousins heard your laugh. We heard you in the forest and thought that you went in there, but we decided not to check because we all agreed not to go into the forest. So instead, we searched the parking lot. We kept looking until we heard your laugh again, but this time we tried to corner you. It turns out, you weren't even there, because every time we did try to corner you to a car, you would just disappear. We thought that you were pulling a prank on us and hiding in between the cars, but there would be no way for any of us to not find you. That's why we asked if you ever moved, because we thought you were so fast at dodging us." I just laughed it off. They gotta be joking. I kept on reassuring them that it was one of the younger cousins, but they kept on denying it. It wasn't until recently when Sheng and I were hanging out and she told me something that definitely changed my mind. She told me that she didn't want to say it out loud because it seemed like her and only another person noticed it. That night, when they looked into the forest, they saw a small girl. They couldn't tell if they were just seeing things since it was pitch black outside with very small street lamps. She said that she saw a small girl crouching down, looking at her. The girl had messy hair and a bluish skin tone with pure white eyes. She wasn't sure if it was a pansong since she was a kid back then and thought that maybe she was just spooked. It wasn't until another cousin pulled her aside and told her to keep walking. It turns out that they also saw the same thing, but just told them not to pay any attention to it. They never talked about it to this day. I was 16 years old, and at the time, I was flirting with a pretty girl from my school. One day, my parents told me to go to a Hmong funeral for a relative of ours. I really didn't want to go, because I wanted to spend that evening with that hot girl. During the funeral, everything was going well, until she texted me that she just wanted to be friends. Dang, that's hard, bro. I got pissed. I went outside for fresh air, and to take out my anger, I said out loud, "You friend-zoned me because I couldn't go out on a date with you? That's so messed up." Yeah, it's so messed up. I spent the rest of the time at the funeral outside, just on my phone thinking about life and how mad I was. I finally went home to my grandma's house to stay there for the night. Sleeping in the living room, I remember precisely I woke up at exactly 5 a.m. I didn't think much of it, so I went back to sleep with my back on the couch and both my hands on my chest. I shut my eyes for about 10 seconds, and all of a sudden, I couldn't move. Then I hear from the kitchen tapping noises. Tap, tap, tap. Like something was slowly sneaking up on me from the kitchen. In the living room, my grandma had those straw carpets that Hmong people have. When the noise made it to the living room, I heard the footsteps of the thing stepping on the carpet, getting closer to me. However, at this point, it didn't sound like footsteps anymore. It sounded like it was crawling on all fours. I told myself, let me open my eyes right now and see how it looks like. I'm very glad to myself that I never had the courage to open my eyes during this, because I feel like I would have been traumatized for life. I never opened my eyes, but as it got closer, I felt a ghostly hand. It was as if someone put their hand 1 inch away from my face, not touching you, but you could feel their presence. The hand went to the side of my head, and then I felt gravity in front of my face. The world then turned static, and I heard a shaman chanting in front of my face. I fought it for what seemed like hours, when in reality, it was just only 30 seconds. When I finally broke free, I got my blankets and slept in my grandma's room. The next morning, I told my grandma about the incident. She then grabbed a string and tied it on my hand. After her chanting, my grandma told me, "A ghost girl saw that you were mad at something, so she followed you here to see you." Ever since then, I'm always on my best behavior at Hmong funerals. You gotta go Laos and Thailand if you want a girlfriend. Interested in sharing your stories? Submit them to HmongChronicles@gmail.com or in the description below. Here is the next story. Thank you. So this happened a few years ago, and I have experienced a few paranormal activities in my life, but this one freaked me out a little bit. A quick backstory to what led to an early morning experience. My oldest sister, Mai, had to attend her mother-in-law's funeral. My other sister, May, also tagged along with Mai to support her. We all know how stressful and exhausting it can be. Because of this, my youngest sister, Nina, had to babysit May's 4 kids for the next 4 days. I couldn't attend the funeral because I had to work and I had school. I agreed to come over early Monday morning after I got off of work. That was so Nina could drive the older kids to school and I would stay with the 2 younger siblings until she got back. I got home from work at around 2 a.m. and I lost track of time studying when Nina texted me. This was around 3:30 when I was about to go over. I finished up what I was working on and I packed my things, heading over to May's house. I quietly entered the house and set my book bag on a chair in the dining room. I then grabbed a blanket and was planning to crash on the couch because the kids were going to wake up in 3 hours. I left the living room light on because it felt a little too dark for me. I was exhausted, but just before I was going to lay down on the couch, I had an uneasy feeling, like I was being watched. I looked straight into the darkness of the dining room that led through the kitchen. I just kept on looking into the darkness. I thought to myself that I was just probably paranoid and that if there was a ghost or spirit, I didn't have the time for their games. I lay down on the couch and checked the time, 4:03 a.m. Crap, I have to sleep now. I'll just text Nina that I'm here and crashing in the living room because I didn't want to wake up the kids. I set my alarm to 7 a.m. and then closed my eyes. As I was drifting off to sleep, I felt a sudden, overwhelming feeling come over me. My heart started to race. Whatever it was, I could not sleep, and so I decided to play some soothing classical music to help me. Despite this, I kept on feeling this overwhelming sensation. As it got worse and worse, it felt like the room was being crowded with more than one person. They were all watching me. Something just kept telling me to open my eyes, and I quickly opened them, and I felt so scared and kept looking around. I then texted my sister that I was going to come in and sleep with them. I walked into the bedroom, closed the door, and squeezed myself into the bed. I felt calmer and relieved and knocked out instantly. I woke up from my alarm and turned it off. My sister was awake as well. This was when I decided to tell her what I experienced. After I was done, she looked at me with her eyes wide open. "I felt it too," she said. "What do you mean you felt it too?" I asked. So, before the sun had set, one of the girls said that she was scared because she felt as though someone was peeking through the window. I thought it may have been you, but it wasn't. I checked and no one was near the house. She kept on saying that something was there. I freaked out, so I closed the curtains. Later that night, around 9 p.m., I was with the baby and his brother in the living room watching Cocomelon, and I felt so scared all of a sudden. I kept looking into the darkness of the kitchen like something was looking back. I made sure all the doors and windows were locked, but I was still terrified. It was kind of feeling like more than one person was looking at you, I asked. "Yeah, kind of crowded, but you know that there's nothing there." This was when I took the boys and we all went to sleep early. I didn't want to text you when you came. I didn't really want to scare you because I know you'll be too tired for that. I quickly grabbed my phone and texted the family group chat. "Hey May, since when was your house creepy? Nina and I felt scared last night. It was weird. When are you guys coming home?" I got a text a few seconds later and May replied, "I'll tell you when I come home." What the heck? No freaking way that we are all having the same uneasy, scared feeling. It turns out that May never felt scared in her home until the night she left before the funeral. She was working out in the basement, and she felt scared like someone was watching her. May didn't tell anyone and thought that she was just being paranoid and tried to play it off. Perhaps it was the stress catching up with her. It wasn't until I said something that we all connected about it. Maybe it was my sister's mother-in-law that came to say her last goodbyes, but even then, I'm not too sure. I've never had consistent dreams, especially the scary ones. Let's just say that this was one of the scariest things that had happened to me. This past year, my family and I have gone through a lot with the loss of both of my grandparents. It's been difficult and hard to cope with. My grandma's death was the one that took me by surprise. It's been a few months now since her funeral, and I don't know why I had this scary yet bittersweet dream. It honestly still gives me shivers down my spine just remembering it. I was planning on taking a nap and told my little sister to wake me up in 30 minutes. My dream started in the funeral home, but instead of mourning, we were all joyful and celebrating. It was weird because we were all still wearing black clothing, but everyone was happy. Looking at the doorway, I saw all my relatives walk in, including the ones that moved far away. And then all of a sudden, my deceased grandma walks in. She was smiling and happy to be there with all of her grandchildren and children. I was happy but confused. I walked up to her and sat next to her. I asked, "Grandma, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here." And at the back of my neck, I could feel something looking at me. Something evil. My grandma stared straight at me and did not say a word. I couldn't look back either. I was too afraid. This demon was familiar to me, like I had dreamed about her before. In my head, I knew what she looked like already. She was so close, yet so far. All the hairs on my body stood up. My dream then shifted perspectives, and it was now a different scenery. I was at the front desk of this office with my uncle's dad and older sister. As I stood there, with my back facing the rest of the room, I could feel the evil presence. She was standing at least 6 feet behind me. As I was sleeping, I could feel my cold sweat and my heart was racing. I knew I needed to wake up before she got to me. I was so scared of what would happen to me if I died in my dream. I was thinking to myself, how am I laying down? I opened my eyes, but my body was stiff, laying straight, and my door cracked a little bit open. I knew that this didn't feel right. I could not move for a good minute and started panicking. This was my first time almost experiencing sleep paralysis. Luckily, I had fallen asleep with something in my hand. I used my strength to grip it and tried to move my hand. I was now finally awake, but it was 2:15 in the morning. I thought it was safe to just turn on my side and sleep in a different position, hoping that it would help. I closed my eyes, and the dream had continued. I was so scared. I knew what was coming. In this scene, we were back at the front desk. It was just my dad and I. I had gained courage to tell him about my grandma and this monster that was following me. He told me that he'd tell the uncles and shamans to do a secret ceremony for me, knowing that the ghost had no good intentions. I felt relieved. The scene changed back to the funeral. I was now sitting with my grandma again, laughing and smiling with her. Yet, I was sad because I knew it was not going to last and that she was going to go away soon. There was a long pause. My grandma turned to me and said, "Be careful of that one," and pointed at the monster behind me. As soon as she did that, my eyes opened and I was awake. I gasped for air and shivered. I could not sleep anymore. This morning, I told my dad about my dream with tears streaming down my face. I was so scared that I was going to die and couldn't even help myself. I couldn't move or do anything. I don't know why she came to me like that. It was only meant to be a nap, not a sleep for the whole night. My dad also told me that maybe my grandma was just trying to tell me that she was ready to leave and go to heaven. She wanted that last moment. I was actually with her the night before she passed and begged her not to think about death because I still needed her there with us. My biggest regret, however, is not saying goodbye to my grandma the next day when I went to work. Dang, that's sad. Make sure you tell your grandma and grandpa that you love them. I know OGs don't. They'll probably just yell at you, be like, but you know, just tell them. This is my uncle's experience. It's a short story, but I promise you, it will creep you out. My uncle decided to go to a Hmong funeral. You know how they have the dead body on a platform? Well, the body was tied down with rope. The deceased individual was tied at the hips, around the arm and the body, on the shoulders, and lastly, on the legs. The rope was just to hold the body from rising up, because when you die, it gets too hot and the arms and legs go up. Later on in the day, as people were going around their business, it was feeding time for the deceased individual. This was a practice that they would do. What they did was put a fully cooked chicken on top of the platform before the deceased individual's head. As they were chanting, the dead person's arm started to reach out and grabbed the chicken behind his head. The dead person then proceeded to eat the chicken, and as it finished its meal, it put its hand back down at its waist.